Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this. As parents, it is completely natural to have these grand, amazing dreams for your kids' global education. We all picture them strolling across these lush green campuses, debating fluently in English, and building a network of international friends that'll literally last a lifetime. And it's a beautiful vision. For some, it absolutely does become reality. But to actually get there successfully, we need to look past the shiny marketing brochures and really understand what happens when you send a child thousands of miles away from home.
We almost always start with a beautiful set of expectations, right? We're talking total English immersion, finally escaping that intense private tutoring culture of Hawk1 and getting round-the-clock perfect care. But the reality, well, it's often quite different. Instead of total immersion, we actually see national clustering, where students just naturally group up by their home country. We see intense global tutoring that honestly just shifts the competition overseas, and suddenly there is a massive demand for self-management. Now, this stark contrast, it isn't about failing, it's just a fundamental mismatch between what we imagine in our heads and how the system actually operates on the ground.
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the financial shock. Second, the emotional reality. Third, autonomy versus management. And fourth, we'll wrap up with a personality checklist.
All right, jumping into section 1, the financial shock, and those hidden costs that go way beyond your initial budget.
This is usually the very first major blind spot for parents. Get this, according to the data, the actual lived cost of international schools often balloons to anywhere from 1.3 to 2 times your originally anticipated tuition budget. You might have sat down and carefully calculated the standard tuition and the boarding fees, but you're likely severely underestimating the true total cost of this whole transition. Let's break down exactly why that happens.
Basically, tuition is merely the entry fee into a global middle-upper-class lifestyle. The hidden costs generally hit you in 3 distinct ways. First up, mandatory school fees. Think capital levies, tech fees, activity charges, stuff completely left out of the headline tuition. Second is holiday logistics. You have to remember, a lot of boarding schools completely close their dorms during holidays, so that means paying for international flights, temporary guardians, or hotel stays multiple times a year. And third, lifestyle. Your kid is entering an environment where weekend trips to the city, daily cafe runs, taking Ubers everywhere, and brand name shopping are just standard parts of the social culture. And this total financial burden, it scales dramatically depending on the country and its specific culture of elite extracurriculars. Take Singapore, with its high living costs and intense academic focus. Total costs there can reach up to 200 million Korean won annually. Over in the UK, where expensive social participation like rowing, horseback riding, European trips are just the norm, you're looking at hitting 300 million. And the US elite boarding system? Oh, with the literally limitless demand for creative portfolio building, total cost there can soar up to an astounding 500 million won a year. We really need to shatter the myth that going overseas means escaping private tutoring. The competition doesn't vanish, it just shifts to a super intense, high-cost global arena. Students aren't just taking regular classes anymore. They're taking rigorous SAT, IB, or AP courses that often require really expensive private tutors. They have to stand out with research projects, founding startups, and attending highly competitive summer camps. And the college consulting fees alone, those can run up to 50 million Korean won a year. You're not escaping the academic arms race, You're just paying a premium to enter the global one.
Let's move on to section 2, the emotional reality. We're talking about isolation and homesickness.
I want you to lock this number in your head, 71 to 76%. That is the percentage of boarding students who experience significant homesickness. It is a near universal struggle. So, if your child calls home crying, it is absolutely not a sign of failure and it's not a sign of weakness. It is a statistical norm. Think about it. They are suddenly forced to answer massive questions like, who am I? And where do I belong? In a completely foreign environment.
A huge part of this isolation actually stems from something called language fatigue. We really need to redefine how we view the language barrier. A student might be brilliant, right? They might write a perfect A-plus essay on history or biology, but that's academic English. They can still feel entirely mute when they're trying to express deep sadness, stress, or even just share nuanced jokes with their peers. That psychological gap between speaking perfectly in class and completely lacking the emotional vocabulary to just vent your feelings, it's incredibly exhausting for a teenager. And this leads us to a behavior parents constantly criticize but honestly really need to understand: 90% of international students report desperately missing the familiar sensory experience of home. This is exactly what drives them to crave their native food and cluster with peers who speak their native language. We need to reframe this completely. When your child hangs out exclusively with Korean friends or begs for Korean food, they are not rejecting their global education. They are utilizing a natural, highly necessary coping mechanism for psychological survival. They aren't just hungry for food, they are hungry for the psychological safety of home.
Which brings us to Section 3, autonomy versus management. This is the core educational philosophy clash. We are dealing with two entirely different worlds here. On one hand, you have the Korean parental expectation, micromanagement of homework, passive observation in class until you're perfectly ready to speak, and an overall environment of, well, flawless preparation. But then you have the boarding school reality, complete self-responsibility, a demand for active, loud participation, and a culture that explicitly tolerates and honestly even encourages making mistakes as a core part of learning. Good schools overseas, they do not hold your child's hand. They expect independence from day one. So what does this autonomy system actually look like in practice? Well, if a student misses a homework assignment, it's their problem. It is not the teacher's job to chase them down. Silence is heavily penalized in participation grades. In this system, an East Asian student who quietly observes until they're 100% ready is actually at a massive disadvantage compared to a student who just boldly speaks up, even with flawed grammar. Assertiveness is always rewarded over silent perfection. All right, moving to Section 4, the climax of today's explainer, the personality checklist for success. This right here is your ultimate checklist. Let's look at a thriving student. They're highly independent, extroverted, they possess a high sense of ownership over their schedule, and crucially, they embrace mistakes without fear. They know how to leverage the autonomous system to grow. A struggling student, on the other hand, is dependent on adult supervision, they're highly introverted, and intensely perfectionistic. Listen, for an introverted perfectionist who is terrified of making a grammar mistake, this highly autonomous, loud, participation-heavy environment can easily lead to severe burnout and deep, deep loneliness. So if you do decide to go forward with this, how do you actually support them? Here are 3 actionable steps. First, acknowledge cultural expression differences. Tell them it's okay if they are a bit quieter. It's a cultural difference, not a lack of intelligence. Second, set clear lifestyle budgets before they leave. Do this early so the global upper-class peer pressure doesn't completely ruin your finances. And third, arguably the most important, provide a totally safe space for emotional venting in their native language. Having that emotional safety net is far, far more critical than you just checking up on their grades over Zoom. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this really grounding thought. International schools are neither the ultimate answer nor a guaranteed failure. Their success depends entirely on the alignment with your child's innate personality. We really have to strip away the prestige of the school brand, all those beautiful campus photos, the Ivy League acceptance rates, and place the focus squarely back on the individual child sitting right in front of you. Finally, I want to conclude this explainer with a pretty provocative question, something for you to deeply reflect on before making this massive life decision. Are you sending your child overseas for their personal growth or to fulfill your own educational fantasy? It's a tough question, I know, but an absolutely necessary one. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I really hope this provided the clarity you need to make the best choice for your family.